Alright, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to a continuing series of nation analyses on the nations that are in the current Disciples game, in which I am playing Pelagia as part of a super weak meme team. And yet again, I picked a member of one of the other teams to take out and demonstrate. Today, it's early age Arcoscephale, and you may be wondering, what on earth am I looking at, and why have you played more turns? The answer is, I haven't played more turns. This is turn 13, and that is a 42 province expansion. It is a 42 province expansion with safe provinces secured inside my land for later capture. It is a 42 province expand where there are still targets on the board that I can take every turn, and if I took this forward 3 turns, I would conquer even more. It is a 42 province expand where pretty much every unit I've created in this game is still alive. It's one where I have 1 fortress up and 4 under construction. It's one where my income is solid. And it's one where my net scales are, let's see, +2, +5, +3, +6, +7, +8, +9. +9 scales build. Early age Arcoscephale is not weak. Now, of course, before I go into a nation analysis, let me just flag, you will never get expansion like this because you run into nations all over the place. You're much more constrained. This just demonstrates the capacity of a nation to expand, and Arcoscephale can expand. With that said, let's talk about why Arcoscephale is, for a human nation, great. Or at least deserves a spot amongst the genuine contenders of the era that can stand up for itself early, middle, and late game, even if it doesn't have the draw card units that some other nations might have. Let's look at the unit lineup, although we will have to go into the mod inspector to look at their summons later on. Troop lineup. At first impressions looks a bit slingers are garbage. Well, they're usually considered garbage. They're the equivalent of militia. Instead of getting an actual militia unit, Arcoscephale gets a slinger. May be useful if you have flaming arrows. 7 gold, 2 resources, 3 recruitment points. You can shit them out. But 8 sling damage, low range. A lot of ammo though. You'd need flaming arrows to make this worthwhile in any way, shape, or form. The sort of light hoplites they have, which are wearing leather hauberks, which the historian in me is questioning of. Anyway, this is a 10 gold, 8 resource, 9 recruitment point, dead average, long spear, so length 3 spear, so repel possible, just not with very good skills, formation fighting infantryman. It's okay. it's okay. It's got decent map move. It's okay. The formation fighter gives it a little more utility than it otherwise would have, but makes it more vulnerable to evocations. A lot of people will instead prefer the Peltus, which loses formation fighter and 4 points of protection, but gains a javelin, and is also even cheaper on the resources, if the same on the recruitment points. That tells me these are the same basic soldier type, just trained in a different way. The Icarid is a recruit anywhere flying unit. These are birds. They're not particularly high map move birds. 12 map move is not great, but yeah, and 11 protection, 7 encumbrance. It's not a very good bird, but it's a bird. The idea here is that Icarids use these winged harnesses that the mage engineers have produced to allow them to fly like Icarus. One thing that makes them interesting compared to Kalian flyers is that they are still size 2, so you can fit 3 in a square. The Icarid is not actually that bad. It's resource and recruitment points intensive, but it's got decent morale. Okay, for the early age this is okay protection, average stats across the board. The defense skill isn't great, but you get 3 per square. They hit moderately hard with this 15 pierce or slash. The Icarid is not terrible, and yet you probably won't see many. The Myrmidon is slightly more expensive and dials the protection all the way up to 17, ups the stats, brings the cost 15. So this is a formation fighter 17 protection infantry unit. It's a heavy, verging on super heavy infantry unit. Certainly by the standards of the early age, this is the super heavy infantry unit because middle-aged Ulm's black plates have not yet been invented. They are not even a gleam in the imaginations of the warrior smiths of Ulm as yet. And with 4 per square, this is a tough thing to cut down. problem with the Myrmidon is threefold. There are three issues I have with it. The first is map move 10, so you'll only ever move one square. The second is encumbrance 9. You're at encumbrance 50 and taking penalties after, 5 swings. 6, realistically, when you account for natural tick down. Which means they will eventually fatigue out, and they're extra vulnerable fatigue plays. They are slow and they are resource expensive. That said, it is a human with 17 protection, 13 hit points, morale 13, formation fighter, a reasonable attack and defense that hits moderately hard in the early age. I don't have too many bad things to say about this, right? These infantry they're okay. And some of them even could be described as good in certain circumstances. Then you get a size 4 trampler lineup, which is great. You get a chariot, which is a size 4 16 protection, 14 defense trampler for only 40 gold, but admittedly only 10 hit points. You can use these to do trample-based expands. The chariot archer is 10 more gold, and can still trample. So you can turn off the archer and tell it to attack, in which case it will still trample. The main advantage of having the archer then is that you get unsurroundable 1. Is that worth it? Probably not. Yeah, it's going to save a little bit of defense penalty and get them save it just a little bit longer, but yeah. That said, I believe what happens is when it loses its hit points, this goes into second shape. So it may actually significantly improve the health of the chariot. We'll check that in Dom Inspector later on, but don't quote me on it yet. The Wind Rider is what I used for my 42 province expansion. The Wind Rider is a flying... This is a flying, elven cavalry unit, but without glamour. But it can fly, is basically the trade-off here. You pay 55 gold. You get something with 13 hit points, 17 protection is the crux here. This thing is wearing the Myrmidon equipment. But because it is mounted and the horse is carrying the weight, or rather the Pegasus is carrying the weight, the encumbrance is only 5. 17 protection, 5 encumbrance. 12 magic resistance because of the magical mount, 14 morale, they're not going to rout. Good strength, good attack skill, excellent defense skill because it's mounted. Basic defense skill 14, mounted, armor per shield defense. So the Pegasii gives it +3, but the basic defense skill of this unit is 14. It's good. They are expensive, 55 gold, 27 resources, 46 rec points, but they can move 22. This is a very mobile sacred with 2 attacks. A lance, which it continues to attack with after its first strike, so you get the charge bonus, but it's not then discarded, and the hoof attack. This is good. This is a good sacred unit. It's cap only, but the combination of high defense, and very high protection means that they're very unlikely to die to most indie types. And if you pick your targets, they will survive and go through expansion with minimal attrition. And that's before you throw a decent bless on top of them. This expansion was done using a poorly thought out utility bless. I'll show it in a moment. It was really nothing because I didn't expect to use this demo because it was the first one I did. I thought I'd have to learn the expansion first. I did it and it was so easy. So let's say unit lineup. The Wind Rider is a clear highlight, and there's some niches to the other ones. You've got some infantry. You've got a heavy infantry choice. You've got a moderately armored flying choice if you really want it for some reason, although they're fire vulnerable and not superb. You've got size 4 chariot tramplers with decent protection and thus moderate survivability relative to their cost. And then you have a good mage lineup. This is a good mage lineup. The scout is okay. Scouts don't normally make a nation unless you have a sacred scout like Jotun and you start to think about weird things. The engineer is a recruit anywhere. 40 gold, 1 recruitment point. And then look at this. Siege bonus 25, castle defense bonus 25. For 40 gold, you can put out 50, so for 80 gold you can put out 50 castle defense per turn that won't impact your supply limit. Engineers can be obnoxious in their ability to generate siege defense on the cheap. They are also masons, which means they give Arcoscephali the ability to go up to a higher level of fort than you would normally see in the early age. They and mage engineers share that trait. They are old, they'll get diseases, they'll die eventually, but you'll have growth scales to hold that off. This unit means that if you have enough forts, and thus commander points are not at a super premium, you should never have siege problems as Arcoscephali. Between the ability to have slingers, between the fact that your sacreds contribute a little bit more, so they're worth something at least, it's still less efficient than bringing just ordinary infantry. Icarid's a decent siege strength though, but this is some of the cheapest siege strength money can buy. It just costs commander points. The Skeptic is a stealthy heretic. He goes into your land, he practices with a sharp tongue and a dry wit, it says in the description. So, as you can probably tell, Arcoscephale at this point is city-state, even pre-city-state era Greece. It's got elements of city-state classical Greece in that you have skeptics and philosophers, and you have the mythology of the Pegasii, and it's quite high fantasy, but you also have the mounted charioteers that were characteristic of that aristocratic and killing period. You've got the myrmidons, who are of sort of the Trojan era of myth. This is the early Grecian mythology. They don't have a fully evolved hoplite, for example, but it turns out we're going to end up skipping that in the evolution of Arcocephali through the ages. This is notably, I believe, Arcocephali before it's conquered or at least heavily influenced by the Amorians. The Icarid champion is a flying 60 leadership champion. The Myrmidon is an 80 leadership formation fighting leader, who is 70 gold and otherwise unremarkable, but you won't recruit many of those because we'll get onto the Windlord later on. Chariot commander is a trampling commander with 60 leadership. No. Then we get into some of the good. The good is the mage lineup and the Windlord. Mystic is in many ways your primary research and a secondary combat mage. It is a non-sacred 135 gold non-slow to recruit that gives you 12 research points base. It is astral, which means instantly this is both a slave and a tool for magical access. You get one of fire, water, earth, and astral. So that's potential astral 2, potential fire 1. You have a 50% chance individually at each of fire, water, and earth, rolled individually. It's possible to score all three of these. The odds are 12.5%, I want to say, that you'll score all three. In which case, you can get fire 2 and water and earth, for example. Or you can get water 2, or you can get earth 2, or you can get astral 2. It's nifty. It's good value, and those extra paths might be useful. So this is a communionable general utility. It is both a lab rat and a combat mage, and as a result, I consider it to have utility. It means that you don't have to think too much about the mage you recruit. Just recruit mystics, and if you go to war, use your mystics, and if you're researching, use your mystics. And you can put out a lot of these mages because labs only cost 250 for Arcoscephali. So you can get both better forts and 250 gold labs, which encourages you to put up lots and lots of labs, which is nifty. The next unit, Melissa. This is also a foreign recruit. So Melissas can be recruited in labbed, templed, non-fort provinces. But it's rare you'll do that because you can recruit them in forts, and who wants to leave a lab and a temple out unexposed and only use one recruitment point per turn? Niche. But you can do it. These are priestesses, often raised outside the cities, and these guys give you two things. They give you nature magic with a possible N2, so you can have N2 native, handy, and they can also give you Air 1, which you'll remember your mystics do not have, so it's instant diversity. And as well as being priests and sacred, they're 3 True Healer. This is True Healer 3. This is the ability to remove afflictions from units, not just diseases. And when it comes to healing up super combatants and summons and whatnot, this is great. This is good. And you can recruit them. They are expensive for what they are. 200 gold for a sacred, potentially either an N2 or an N1 A1 mage is pretty. This is pretty dear, but you get a true healer out of it. The Philosopher. could have been, or could be, a really interesting feature of Arcoscephale. I just don't think it often will be. However, it is likely to play a very big role in the game I'm currently in the Disciples game, because this is a capital-only mage. And I say mage, but it has no magic paths. The Philosophers delve into the theory behind magic, even if they have no magical skill themselves. They critically analyze incantations and magic by observation, cataloging, repetition. Then they develop theorems, which they hand over to actual mages to test. They say, I think this series of incantations or movements or energetic foci will generate a spell. Try it out. Maybe the mage explodes, maybe they don't. Either way, Philosopher doesn't get damaged in the process. Really cool idea, very similar to the monk non-mage researchers of later age man. For 65 gold, you get 10 research, but you get sloth research too. So for every sloth scale, you get +2 research, which means these guys can be very efficient researchers in sloth 3. I just think Arcoscephale benefits more from having production scales, so you can get out Wind Riders and other units. But if you go sloth 3, you can have a 16 RP researcher. And it doesn't say mundane researcher here too, so I haven't tested it, but I think that magic scales would affect that too. In fact, we can really quickly create one. See, it's turn 13, I'm not lying about that. I'm going to cycle a turn idle, just so I can see one. 6, okay, so that's 8. That's a product of his 10, minus 2, 4, 6. That's not affected by magic scales. Okay, so you can get 16 research per unit for, like, pittance. That said, that's only if you go sloth 3. And it's cap only. So while it's handy as a way to bootstrap your research, pass mostly. The Windlord, if I remember correctly, the Windlord didn't use I think it didn't used to be a priest. I think it used to be sacred but not a priest. But eventually they changed it and they made this thing a priest one. So this is a flying 130 gold Wind Rider priest one, and it exists so that you can go to your capital and be real pro, and do that, and recruit a Windlord and 4 Wind Riders, and put out an expansion party every turn, where the team flies out and murders some stuff, using a hold and attack order after the Windlord has had time to bless up his men. So the existence of the Windlord allows you to have mobile hit squads, which is key. It's really handy. 2 more mages in the ordinary lineup. The Mage Engineer is air, earth, and then a random of fire, air, water, earth, and astral. Note again, you've got astral, but you've got astral with almost all of your elemental paths. So this is a tool to wire in the less common paths that you don't get on your mystics. You can wire them into communions using Mage Engineers. You can hypothetically do your Fog Warriors fun, you can do whatever you want using Mage Engineers or mystics using the elemental paths. Also a Mason. Castle defense bonus 30, siege bonus 30, still has a research bonus, recruitment points 2. So all around, it's slightly less efficient for sieging or for construction than the ordinary Mason, but it can do those jobs. And it's also a decent mage for site searching, for research, whatever. This is a multidisciplined expert who is both an engineer and a mage, and one of the things that makes me like the academia of Arcoscephale. And then finally, you have a cap-only super mage, because this is the early age. So we like big cap-only mages that are really cool and that later ages can envy, or at least a lot of later age nations can envy. Air 2, Earth 1, Nature 3, and then 2 randoms. 100% from air, water, earth, nature, and then 10% again. So you can get some small, very rare combinations that can be very cool. 400 gold. Human. Oof. That said, stealthy, recuperating, or 6. Don't thug it. Don't use it as a thug. But if it does get cornered, or 6 might save it just long enough for something else to save it. And it's a seducer. The problem with this as a seducer is not that it won't win battles. The Oread is very capable of winning a seduction assassination. If someone resists the seduction attempt and it becomes an assassination, this is a Nature 3, Air 2, Earth 1. This thing can iron skin. This thing can cast lightning bolts. This thing can swarm like no. This thing can creeping doom. It's an absolute murder fest. This is really solid. However, at 400 gold and 4 recruitment points and being cap only, you're probably not going to use them as seducers. But if you have a few precise targets you want to hit, remember that functionality is there. And it's sacred and it'll take your bless in combat. Also, notably, the ability to get a water nature cross path means that you have a way towards naiads, you have foul vapors capability, you have all that water nature cross path. So you can be a foul vapors nation if you want to be. It's not good foul vapors, it's capital only and it relies on a random. But it's a niche thing that I want to flag because foul vapors capability can be great, particularly when in a game where you don't have middle-aged statists, because you're not middle-aged, you're slightly less likely to encounter it, although there are still nations that can do it. Final things to wind up. You have scrying. Scrying means that inside your dominion, and this is a reason to spread your dominion, you get accurate, automatic scouting. Now, when someone's attacking you, normally that means you should get scouting anyway, because you should have 1 PD. But let's just say your dominion pushes into enemy lands. You can see armies coming. It does your scouting for you. And it's yet another reason that I think Arcoscephale is a bit of a, I'm not going to say easy mode, but it's a bit of a forgiving nation for beginners in a sense, because you have some great expansion options in chariots and wind riders, which are not complex to expand with. You have good research mages. You have some niche things you can do with your big mages, and scouting more or less handles itself as long as you can build forts and temples and labs and get visibility. You see this message: the priestesses have scryed upon our enemies. This is an accurate scouting report of this province. It also has niche use in the very early game. If your dominion bleeds over an independent province before you take it, you can be more confident in your scouting report than you normally would, which means you know more accurately whether you have to double up on an expansion team and use 8 wind riders and a lord, or whether 4 wind riders and a lord, or something like that, is enough. Those are numbers that I'm using with a not so much bless, as opposed to anything too significant. Let me just show off one expansion, and then we'll jump over to the mod inspector to look at the summonable elements of Arcoscephale. Then we'll talk strategy. This way you can see the spells that you have to cast. So let's work from research levels down, and you'll notice these are all conjuration or enchantment. Conjuration 5, procession the underworld. 4, 13 gems, you get 12 lampads. Lampads are ladies with 15 protection who use Banefire torches, which inflict AoE 1 Banefire damage, which is armor piercing and decay on that AoE. I've never seen anyone use these, but there's a case to think that they might be interesting, because you get a lot of them for 13 death gems. They all have supply bonuses on them, which means this might be a great way to feed an army, but you don't have many pop kills. You don't have any pop kills in the early age, except for Therados. But if you did, this is a cheaper way of producing supply items. You're going to get 120 supply as opposed to 100 supply for 2 construction 6 nature items for 10 gems, and you get a bunch of units out of it. They have patrol bonuses, they have recuperation, they have spirit sight. This might be a niche case for using against some of the new Ubar units, because your AoE 1 will always hit them. Your spirit sight means you can see them, although your AoE 1 means you'll hit them anyway. Interesting. I'm not going to rule out the Lampad. I hadn't thought too much of it before I did this, but you know what? There might be a niche case for them. The reason I would usually dismiss them is because it's a human HP unit that costs gems to summon, and they'll normally just be gunned down by anything that humans will be gunned down by because they've got no defense, but they got 15 protection from their invulnerability, so magic will slice them down. But if you're throwing buffs out that will make your army tougher, maybe being able to put a whole bunch of Banefire AoE 1 attacks out maybe that's genuinely worth something. Um, and they also reduce the chance of getting lost using Stygian Gate, which is not something Arcoscephalian normally does. But interesting to note. How to Twilight, I don't like. So you pay 4 Earth Gems and you get this. What's there to say? 55 hit points, but only 12 prot. Has Fear, I guess. Has a patrol bonus. Look, maybe you use them to patrol. They have Spirit Sight, which means they'll see sneaking glamoured units and things like that, which is nifty. They'll be able to see and negate the new, like, invisible Ubar units, sure. And they have an intrinsic magical weapon, which has a Stop the Dead impact. I'm not sure. I think this is cool more than useful, but there might be a case where for 4 Earth Gems, rather than spending, getting a couple of Earth Elementals during battle, maybe a permanent unit with Fear and Patrol that you can keep around and which has Spirit Sight, maybe that could be handy. Monster Boar. This causes the Monster Boar event, which annoys people and causes them to go and patrol. It's an annoyance, and I normally wouldn't spend 10 Nature Gems on an annoyance unless you really, really want to, but you can mess with someone for 10 Nature Gems. Normally you have to use Death Gems to annoy people. Carries. Carries are interesting. This is a Carries. So this thing comes as a unit, which is a flying, ethereal, demonic, Spirit Sight, invisible unit with 2 ghost rending claws, which is a magic, unfortunately magic resistance negates, but armor negating magic weapon. You look at this and go, oh, it's interesting, but I normally wouldn't spend Death Gems on a unit. Remember, this is at Conjuration 6. I'm getting to the point where I'm thinking about, if I have the Death access, I can start getting Wraith Lords instead of for 12 of these ladies. You can get a Wraith Lord instead. The niche comes when you Gift of Reason them and you discover that they've got a hidden blood path on them, which is super nifty. It's an expensive way to break into blood because you need to Gift of Reason them. The Death Gems aren't important, it's the Gift of Reason, and normally spending 30 gems to make a blood 1 is not what you want to do. But if all you need is a blood, you've gone construction, you just need a blood 1 in order to make you Flesh Eaters or something, remember it's there. Otherwise, super niche. Or, yeah. Keldone. The Keldone is a singing statue of gold. I think this is a pass. Their advantage is that it's a communion slave. It's a 25 protection, resistant to everything, immobile communion slave. You can be really annoying by stacking a bunch of indestructible communion slaves in your capital, but they have no magic paths, so they're still going to encumber out and die. Unless there's something about this that I'm missing that prevents it just dying as a communion slave, I would rather be using Misties instead, who I can use, who I can move, who I can research with, and who don't cost gems and mage turns to produce. So I would probably skip the Keldone. The Brass Bull, GC's talked about these a lot. A couple of nations get these. The Calcatori cost 30 fire gems in order to give you a 25 protection Trampler with some attack, with an AoE 1 fire effect, which only has 4 ammunition. It's resistant to just about everything, but it's still just a unit, and it costs 30 fire gems, and it's construction 7. You're probably not going construction 7. You're probably getting to construction 6 and stopping like a normal person, or going to 7 to flex with the artifacts. But most people stop at 6, unless they really need to go weapons of sharpness kind of territory. And if you do, is this really... Because at this point, you can make lightless lanterns. You can make 10 lanterns for 120 research points per turn, assuming you're using hammers, for the price of one of these Calcatori. And it's nice, but it can just get destroyed by anything that's armor negating. You won't make it regenerate. It doesn't heal naturally, so chip damage just sticks with it. I don't know. I think it's cool. I think it's thematic. I'm not great on it. The Hamadryad is not particularly important for you because you normally would get it because you can boost up. Maybe if you're extremely boosting and you're getting a Hamadryad, to get the Hamadryad, then the Hamadryad can in turn boost, like, maybe, but it's not a good researcher, it's relatively expensive, it's immobile, it's tough, it's very tough. So maybe there are defensive applications for it, but the fact that you have the Oread means you already have a high nature caster, and you have access to Naiads, which aren't immobile, they're semi-immobile because they're homesick. And then you have an in-battlefield spell, which is the Spartier, which is a tough, undead, formation fighting, resist cold, resist poison, 19 protection, high skill, golden spear armed, so that's a magic weapon, piercing magic weapon that will do 16 piercing damage on its hit, and it will repel some of the time, and you get 10 Spartae for 1 Earth Gem. Is this a better deal than an Earth Elemental? Yes, and it means you can go enchantment rather than conj if you want to. Let's also talk about heroes. I will unload worthy heroes, despite the fact that every game I've ever been in works with worthy heroes, and let's look at it for a moment. So, there are 3 non-worthy heroes. Heroes for early age Arcoscephale. Daedalus is just a decent hero mage. He researches, so he's good for site searching. He gives you a little bit of fire, air, water, and 3 earth in the same package, which means this is a way to boost earth even further. So earth boots gets you 3, it gets you to earth 4, sorry. Not bad. He's a clockwork worklord, which gives you extra clockwork units when he's casting those spells, but most people don't do that to a great extent. He's probably going to sit in your capital, give it 50 castle defense bonus, and do big earth casting. Maybe even, if you can get the right boosters, get you elemental royalty later on. Asterios is a unique hero. It is a invulnerability 20, slash resistant, blunt resistant, size 4 trampler. That's not great. Like, it's tough, but it's still going to get harassed down and stabbed to death by chip damage most of the time. It's not sacred, it's not going to get a bless. It's niche, it's... yeah, not big on it. I'm also not hugely big on Pathos, the son of the Titans. Pathos is very, very tough for a human, because he's invulnerability 20 and he's got 18 protection from his gear. He's inspirational and he has Awe. The Awe protects him slightly, but he's mostly here for the 120 leadership. You're not going to thug with a non-mage human, even if this guy's got 30-something prot. Killing something with 30-something prot is entirely possible, because anything armor negating is going to wreck him. But, that's cool. Let's reload worthy heroes, because I think every nation should be analysed with and without it, because it's one of those non-controversial mods that most Dominions games I've played in use. What does this add? Well, you now have the Muse. This is a multi-hero, so you can get it multiple times. And this is a multi-hero with Awe, Seduction, Astral 3, and +2 from Fire, Air, Water, or Nature. And it's Inspired Researcher. It spreads Dominion. So now we're talking. We've got, this thing is viable as a Seductress, because it's got the paths you need to be lethal. It's got big astral, so maybe it's a Mind Hunter, because it's got recuperation, so it's a Mind Hunter. It is a Forger, because of those paths if it needs to be. It is an Inspired Researcher. It spreads Dominion. Great. There's so many uses for Muses, and you'll be glad to have them. Nothing really changes in the Monster of the Maze. The Maker of the Maze remains the same. The Son of Titan, I think, gets different... Yeah, it gets personal luck and becomes sacred in Worthy Hero. The personal luck makes him genuinely harder to kill, as does the Blessing, especially if you've got some defense skill in there. So maybe he is actually a funny light thug, but you're probably still going to use him for the 120 leadership, right? But if he does get surrounded, yeah, cool. And then this guy, He's got the Phalangite sort of look, so I wouldn't have expected him in the early age. But here we got Inspirational 2, 160 Leadership. This is a really fancy general, is basically what this is. If this was a multi-hero, it'd be really, really good. But what you've got here is an extremely good leader / general. So, the Muse is the biggest addition there, because those are really, really cool. Yeah, you'll want to use them as inspired researchers. You'll be tempted to use them as seductresses because they will reliably kill what you're talking about. They're high astral, they can mind hunt, they recuperate. I like muses. And multi-heroes just have such utility and encourage you to go luck 3. All that said, I'm going to cut back into the game now and let's talk a little bit about strategy for Arcoscephale. Okay, this is a quick splice into this video because I recorded a section here, it corrupted, I only discovered that in editing. So what we're going to chop to next after this is, Base Guy gave a speech on, I want to demo the Wind Riders expanding using a shitty bless that I didn't really even think about before I used it because I thought this was going to be my first familiarization, and I ended up doing perfectly fine, and as a result wanted to use the expansion as the actual video. So that's what we're going to cut to in a moment, and then after that what I'm going to give is a description on the overall basic strategy of Arcoscephale, which I prefaced in this section, which was leveraging Wind Rider expansion into a hybrid army where you use airborne outriders with human, mage and troop blob lines to go and take people's fortresses and make them very, very sad. The one thing I don't say later, which I did mention here, which I also want brought in, is that when you do crack fortresses, the existence of attack rear units like Icarids and Wind Riders means that you can get behind the walls a bit easier than other human nations can. So even if you're using the humans and the masons to crack the walls, the airborne units complicate the defense of fortresses, particularly if the army and the community is there to give big buffs to the flyers to enable them to draw the enemies away from the gates and thus allow your human infantry to move in. That's all that I said in that section before that was corrupted, so we'll splice forward to me showing off expansion now. Alright, here we are. It was this should have been turn 14, it's actually turn 15 because remember we skipped a turn. I threw out 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 expansion parties and lost nothing, 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 lost nothing. And you'll note in some of those provinces, let's see what we hit. Oh, I hit a conjurer and murdered him, that's fine. Heavy cavalry, fine. More heavy cavalry, yeah, good. Mage, yeah, fine, whatever. Don't care. Let's look at the ones that fought the heavy cavalry, because this is the most impressive province. This is 8 heavy cavalry, 8 light cavalry, 3 mounted commanders, 40 units overall against my 8. Let's see how my Scales Wind Riders did. So what was the bless that I was using, just for illustration purposes? I was using attack skill, shock resistance, defense skill, strength, blood surge. This is a relatively cheap rainbow imprisoned bless. With this bless, and not all of them were blessed until he cast it again, I'm pretty sure. Come on, cast it again, there we go. Okay, 16 attack, 21 defense, and this one, some of that's from experience stars, before it gets blood surge. This 16 attack and the lance means it will kill something on the charge, it will trigger blood surge. So they come down, and what they'll do is they'll drop on this heavy cavalry first. And you can see a couple of them have already killed heavy cavalry. I'm not sure why one of them lost their blood surge. Anyway, okay, here's one with blood surge, 1919. And that's with harassment penalty -3, so that's 1922. Hitting for 19 damage and 13 damage. And then they're just going to lawnmower through while taking no damage, because they are impossible to hit, and when you do hit them, unlike squishy elves, they're fine. This means that were you to put a Barskin Bless, as, spoiler, the elves in my game have, on this unit in an attempt to keep your elves alive, you would also accomplish the goal of pushing your Wind Riders up to Protection 22, which is Ormish Blackplate. At that point, they are an extremely hard to hit Ormish Blackplate infantryman with 2 attacks. Now, their problem is they're 1 a square, but with those sort of stats, it doesn't really matter, does it? Anyway, so You have an army, you have great mages, and you have a sacred that's not to be fucked with. If these sacreds were recruit anywhere, then you would make this a mega blessed nation. As it is, they're good. They're a supporting arm, and we'll talk about that more once we talk about the summons. So I'm going to go to Dom 5 Mod Inspector, and we'll be back after that. So Arcoscephale has a lot going for it. It has good research capabilities. It has a sacred that is capable of expanding and fighting. It's got a average troop lineup outside of its capital that it can sort of lean on. It has decent elemental and some sorcery access, in particularly held up by the Oreads, which ensure that it has good levels of nature access. What it doesn't have is a decent amount of death natively, so you're going to have to conjure yourself into death. It only has very, very limited blood through conjuration and turning curs into blood mages, which I've never actually done or seen done. I've just been told that is so, and I haven't gone and tested it. But you have a functional communion-based lineup. You have excellent economic capabilities because you have efficient fort defenders, you have top-grade forts, you have scrying for defensive intelligence, you have labs that are cheaper than normal, which saves you considerably during your expansion phase. Like, you can afford another upgraded fort from the savings you'll get on normal series of lab constructions, and it'll encourage you to put the labs out sooner. You have heretics, which are nichely useful. What do you make of all this? Well, there's a couple of ways you can go. Arcoscephale can be played as a sort of a rushy sort of nation, leveraging the cap unit for all it's worth. The Wind Rider is good. It's held back by the size 4, which leaves 1 in a square, which means the multi-attack, high attack value sacreds it might come up against will endanger it a lot. But ordinary independents won't touch it, and it's incredibly mobile at the same time. Whereas the line units exist, things like myrmidons and peltasts and cardaces, or however you say that, do well holding a line for a big mage blob. So what you've probably got when you're looking at the Arcoscephale is a vanguard of Wind Riders that expand at the start of the game. Then a typical human death stack army consisting of blocking infantry, a communioned up mage corps, and maybe some supporting masons to help bring down walls more quickly than normal. With the Wind Riders acting as the raiders, the scouts, and the supports that help enable the Death Ball to get to enemy forts and end those enemy forts. Wind Riders can come back onto the army in order to be attack rear or support elements, but mostly they're going to be your expanders and your raiders. It's going to be your communion mages that deliver the actual damage that kills the enemy, because magic is still king. But unlike, for example, say, Middle-Aged Pythium before it starts summoning things, or Tianqi's with its Geomancer communions, you've got a mobile element in the Wind Rider, which, if you can keep them alive and muster them, can range widely and protect and defend the squares and positions around your Death Ball to prevent you running into traps, to prevent you from being ambushed by like individual Wind of Death casters or whatever, because the vanguard job is being done by Wind Riders, and if you lose some Wind Riders to an army, well, you know, you do, but your main army, which is a blob of mages and troops, is preserved. So Arcoscephale should expand quickly. It should then put up forts. It's very good forts. It should discourage enemies from attacking it using the threat of its raiding ability, the fact that its fort walls will be strongly held up, potentially by masons if you need to, but even the threat of masons should be enough to discourage enemies. It should then assemble offensive armies made up of humans and a mage corps, and it should roll onto people's forts and destroy them. It should supplement its defenses in niche circumstances by using, like on a small scale, you can use things like seduction threats, foul vapors, traps, etc., that force enemies to deploy counters everywhere, even if you're only going to bring that threat to play in a couple of individual places. That's the theory of Arcoscephale. For that reason, I don't think Arcoscephale needs an awake expander. I don't think Arcoscephale needs an incarnate bless. I think Arcoscephale needs scales that enable it to take advantage of constructing wind riders, a bless that gives them a little bit more kick, but then an economy that allows it to leverage its good mages and decent troops to produce death balls, because communion nations are hungry for gold in their forts because they need to produce lots and lots of small mages in order to get that critical mass up and destroy the enemy. You have a couple of ways you can go with your magic, mostly enabled by the fact that both mage engineers and Misties can enter communions, and between them you have access to all of the elemental paths. So this instantly screams out decent sized communion, a couple of big mages casting all the big battlefield buffs. You can be fog warrioring, you can be army of leading, you can be mass protection. You can be mass protection early. When it comes to big nature buffs, you don't need a communion because the Oread can do it for you, and by being stealthy, the enemy won't know when you have them. You don't need to actually reveal the Oreads you have with your army unless you're about to go into a fight where you need their support. Otherwise, just in case it's a trap, you can keep them hidden. An Oread with a Thistle Mace with the Strength of Gaia is Nature 5 and is entirely capable of carrying out Howl, Mass Protection, Serpent's Blessing, all by herself, and that's if she doesn't hit her nature random. If she hits a water random, she enables Foul Vapors. If she hits an air random, she's air 3. That's actually pretty good air. At that point, I would consider booting her into a communion. Let's talk Fog Warriors. Let's talk against enemies who really need to be able to fly. Let's talk Storm. Let's talk Arrow Fend early on against anything that relies on, for example, flaming arrows, is countered by an air random Oread in a communion. This is a good nation. It's good because it gives you a variety of tools at every stage of the game. Is it the strongest in the age? Probably not. The general consensus I've heard is this nation is average, only because there are some very strong nations out there in the early age that are going to want to mess with you. But I think Arcoscephale stands on its own 2 feet. Certainly in the early game it's stronger than Beratos, for example, and it doesn't lack entirely in late game tools. I think the vulnerability Arcoscephale is going to have is the vulnerability that every human communion nation has. While you have perhaps the cheapest possible way to produce a death ball that nothing can deal with cheaply, human communion mages are efficient at that because they give you such huge path access and they're cheap and they double as researchers, so they're a good economy pick. And they're likely to have good magic because they're so good at researching. They're vulnerable to things like battlefield wipes, remote attacks, specially designed supercombatants that have seen your design and are running with it. But I don't think that's necessarily a problem. If there's something Arcoscephale lacks, it's the ability to easily thug, or to build counter thugs, or to build supercombatants. Because the elemental paths are not natural supercombatant recruitment paths. For immortals and thugs and whatnot, you want death or you want blood primarily. You can get some places. The other problem is that some of your access is quite shallow. So for example, your earth access is E2 normally. Very, very rarely E3. So outside of combat, getting boosted up in order to cast the big stuff or forge the big stuff, it's not really there. So maybe it's worth thinking about your bootstraps. It's worth thinking about access on your late game mages. It's about thinking whether or not your god can provide access to things that you lack, even if they're imprisoned, just for that late game. Once you've got the research, have the god come on to the line once you've done the research and deliver the sort of items and conjuration that you need. That said, if you're playing with worthy heroes, you've got some options. This is still not enough to get into elemental royalty territory. So A3 is not enough. You need A4 in order to make the hat and go to A5. But if you can get a ring of wizardry, or if you have high astral access, or if you have access elsewhere, maybe you can make thugs and super combatants through the conjuration path. But as it is, functional troop lineup, the ability to build human armies supported by big mage cores, great defensive abilities in the form of scrying, fort defense, advanced fortifications, and cheap labs, all of which encourage you to fortify more frequently than other people and make your fortresses harder to siege down efficiently, coupled with a mobile sacred raider, and if you need to, recruit anywhere flyer, so you always have that attack rear complication. I'm not sure what else to say other than to say my temptation would be to bless but not overbless the Wind Riders, so that they can expand and be really lethal without being like relying on them as your entire rush power, the way you might with, say, a Vanir. But if you're in a Disciples game, like these guys are, maybe you do Hellbless the Wind Riders, deal with the recruitment, the bottlenecks around recruiting them. But still, I would rather have decent scales, produce a decent number of them, because they can expand perfectly fine with a minimal bless. And they can be effective against enemy forces and PD and against small armies by themselves with a minimal bless. So, this is early age Arcoscephale. It gives you a lot of tools to work with. It gives you a tool to be present in the game early. It gives you a workable army later. It gives you communion mages. What it doesn't give you is big access. It doesn't give you death. It doesn't give you blood. And it doesn't give you high astral unless you're playing worthy heroes. And as a result, you're playing shallow. You're playing shallow magic in the strategic map, but through your communions, you're playing very high levels of all your magic options on the battlefield. And for me, that's good enough. Also, your Rainbow Mages means you can site search a lot of things very efficiently, very effectively, get lots and lots of gems, especially in the early age Bonanza, where gems are freaking everywhere. So that's what I have to say about Arcoscephale. I would fear them moderately. This is certainly nothing to laugh at. Not every nation can do this. Are there stronger and more dangerous nations out there? Yes, in many respects, but Arcoscephale couples its ability to defend itself and to expand with the ability to boom later on through a great research capability, a great fortification capability, and a natural defensive advantage. So, the Greeks are strong. Play the Greeks. Have fun with them. Happy to hear what you have to say about them. And we'll start seeing shortly how Herdalas, who is an excellent player, has leveraged Arcoscephale in the Disciples game. Cheers.